It's part of what, just to be clear, what competition policy, including the Competition Markets Authority, etc., should be, and we will be encouraging to be looking at. And practically, I think there are a number of things. More accountability, so more reporting requirements in terms of social responsibility, in terms of what's done with data, in terms of your digital rights. That will help. And also, I think we are seeing models, and I know the cooperative movement, the co-op is looking at this, for mutual-based platforms, which can, for example, bring potential taxi drivers into contact with customers not using the technology of the 19th century, but using today's technology, but without exploiting a power relationship right now that exists. You're right, we can do that, and those are some of the things we actually would be looking to bring forward as proposals to this government.
Margaret Heffernan, you say you go to Silicon Valley a fair amount. How do you see the small, new, young companies? I mean, it's very cheap to enter the market, everyone says. Are they strong enough to break through, or do they get crushed by the big players?
Well, in fact, what most of them try to do is position themselves so that they'll be bought by the new players.
They want to be crushed.
So actually, they kind of edit their thinking before they even start thinking, which I think is really concerning, because it means all sorts of stuff doesn't get developed. But I do think, if you want to see a really failed market, you can look at pharma. But equally, what we're starting to see there is a kind of some collaborative approaches to new drug development, which is both some smaller private entities together with some academic entities, together with some industrial entities, to do kind of the crowdsourced development of pharma in a way that the market has absolutely failed to supply. So I think there are alternative markets, and my recommendation is, keep an eye out for them and support them any way that you can. There are many, many, many ways to buy books that do not involve Amazon. Okay.
Another question, please. Yeah.
Hi there. One thing that actually concerns me about these big companies is actually the effect they have on freedom of speech. All of these things are moderated, whether it's taking down child pornography or taking down images of women breastfeeding. And most of their moderation policies are very much treated as company secrets. How concerned should we be about the transparency of these particular issues, considering the effect they have on politics and our daily lives?
Yeah, and Facebook was accused of liberal bias in its selection of the material it was putting up on the top of their lists.
Well, I'd like to. I completely disagree with you. I think there's nothing to do with freedom of speech. I think, on the contrary, these entities act as enormous megaphones which allow very small, often small minority opinions to be disseminated around the world. There's a huge difference between your freedom to express yourself and say whatever you want, and what you feel is your entitlement to spread that to everybody around the world and have Facebook or Google acting as a megaphone for you. In fact, one of the most dangerous effects that I think these companies are having is actually in disseminating what were originally quite small minority opinions and giving the impression, for example, at the evil extreme, that there are tens of millions of people who are racist, so, who believe that Jews, are plotting against the world. There used to be, small minorities, little cabals, but now you can connect yourself around the world. There are millions of people in America who believe that Barack Obama is not an American citizen. That is because of the power of the internet. So I think their ability to, and their curation obligations are actually a very serious obligation, which they don't take seriously enough. I think they should be suppressing false and dangerous information more than they do, rather than less, because they are megaphones.
Professor McCloskey.
Yeah, well, one historical fact. In the days before the innovation of steam, circular steam from the presses, in 1792, the government of the day owned, now hear this, secretly, half the newspapers in the kingdom. That's the enemy, dears.
And Chianwara, and then...
It's dangerous no matter who owns the newspapers, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or the government or nice boys with curly hair. For media to be owned by any entity is risky.
What are you talking about?
The concentration of power whether it's government or it's private enterprise. The
usually
concentration.
government.
No, it isn't. That's not correct.
It is. I can tell you. I can give you 1,000 examples.
It was certainly the private sector that brought up all the bus companies in Los Angeles to ensure that there wasn't a public transport system and that people would be dependent on cars.
That's a fairy tale.
That's
on
a
the
fairy
left.
tale. Yeah,
But
the reason why selling a steam engine is not the same as selling search on the internet or selling likes around your network is because that steam engine is worth the same no matter how many other steam engines it's connected to. Whereas that network is it's dependent on how many members of that network there are. So the network effects of Facebook and Google and Amazon and others are huge. And that is why it needs to be, I'm sorry you don't like the word, regulated in different ways, because their power stops new competitive entrants because they haven't got the same size network.
Okay, we're nearly out of time. So what I'm going to do is three people have been particularly persistent, and I'm going to ask them just to give their questions quickly, one after the other, and then we'll wrap up. So, yes, first of all, you, sir. Yeah. How
worried or enthusiastic should we be about the defeat of the world Go champion by a computer that taught itself how to play the game?
Anatol's worried. And there's one here in the front.
Earlier, you were talking about data and companies being accountable and you don't know who, and you're also talking about digital rights for digital citizens. I may be wrong, but I think a lot of the big companies collect big data or metadata, which we're quite unaware of. And so in the ethical debate, should these companies be making this transparent for us, and can they? And if they can't, should they stop that?
There's been a suggestion from a fair few people on the panel that there's the need for a government to have an oversight and regulation of the big companies. And I think that begs the question of how do you ensure that you attract the best people to set that direction?
To do the regulation?
Yeah.
Okay, literally a sentence or two each, because we're coming up towards the end. So, Anatol, basically on that question about the scary technology.
Yeah, well, Owen, you answered that question for me. Yes, I think we should be worried. Artificial intelligence is no longer operating on the basis of pre-programmed instructions. It is beginning to think for itself. It is beginning to observe the play of Go players and therefore narrow what would otherwise be, even for computers, an infinite number of calculations which are required. The number of potential moves in Go is larger than the number of atoms in the universe.
Okay, and just on recruiting good regulators as the sort of representative of the politicians, Chianwara.
What is great about the younger generation, as I call it, and there's evidence for this, is that they do require more of a social purpose in their careers, and you see that in the way in which Google and other big companies try to attract people. They want to know that they're making a difference. The greatest way to make a difference, and that's why I moved from the private sector to the public sector, is through effective government, because that can liberate, educate, empower, and change people for the better. And that is how we look to attract digitally savvy people into government to give the right direction.
Margaret Heffernan?
And what I would say is actually if you don't do that, what you will find yourself facing, the new Silicon Valley buzzword, is algorithmic regulation, which is regulation not being done by politicians, but being done by computers. And I would argue that if Deirdre doesn't like regulation by people, I don't think she's going to like it a lot more when it's done by machine.
Professor McCloskey, last word?
Well, my last word will be in Latin. The Romans said, quis custodiet ipsos custodius. Who is to regulate the very regulators?
The people.
Yeah, the people. You bet. You bet.
You do.
Thank you very much. That was an edition of NewsHour Extra recorded on location in Hay-on-Wye. And if you liked the programme, do make sure you never miss another edition. You can subscribe to our podcast. That's BBC NewsHour Extra into your podcast app or search engine. And you can write to us. The way to do that, email newshour.extra@bbc.co.uk or on Twitter @BBCNHExtra. We do try to reply to all the communications you send to us, but for now, with that programme